it begins with a celebration. May 2023, Abuja's Nnamdi Azikiwe International Airport gleams under the morning sun. Cameras flash, broad smiles beam across the faces of politicians, journalists, and aviation officials. A Boeing 737-800, painted in bold green and white, stands proudly on the tarmac. The crowd roars as the banner is unveiled. Nigeria Air. After decades without a national carrier, the dream was finally reborn. The country's flag would soon fly across continents, a new age of national pride, progress, and promise, or so everyone thought. But beneath the polished speeches and applause, something felt off. Something wasn't adding up, because this aircraft, this proud symbol of Nigeria's rebirth, wasn't Nigerian at all. It wasn't bought. It wasn't even leased to Nigeria Air. The jet belonged to Ethiopian Airlines, borrowed and repainted for this single event. Within hours of the unveiling, social media exploded with confusion and outrage. Videos surfaced, showing the same plane flying under Ethiopian registration days earlier. The truth began to unravel, and what had been hailed as a national triumph suddenly smelled like an elaborate scam. How could an entire government pull off a staged airline launch? And more importantly, why? To understand this insane fraud, we need to go back. Decades before the green and white hoax, before the speeches, before the desperation to prove something, before power changed hands, to the origins of Nigeria's aviation story. In 1958, when colonial flags still fluttered over parts of Africa, Nigeria joined Ghana, Sierra Leone, and the Gambia in a joint venture known as the West African Airways Corporation. But after independence, Nigeria took full control of its share, birthing Nigeria Airways, the nation's first true carrier. Those were the golden years. From Lagos, gleaming aircraft soared across Africa, Europe, the Middle East, and even North America. The airline connected Nigeria to the world, carrying pilgrims to Mecca, diplomats to summits, and athletes to global events. It wasn't just an airline, it was a statement of pride and ambition. The world saw a confident new nation rising from colonial shadows. But as the years passed, that pride was replaced by the disease that has infected too many of Nigeria's dreams: corruption. By the 1980s, Nigeria Airways was falling apart from the inside. Funds meant for maintenance vanished into private pockets. Government subsidies turned into bottomless pits of waste. The airline, once run by professionals, became a playground for politicians and cronies. Contracts were inflated, ghost workers collected salaries, planes sat idle on runways, grounded by debt and decay. Then came political interference. Every new administration treated Nigeria Airways as a tool for reward and patronage. Ministers appointed friends and loyalists, people who knew nothing about aviation, to key positions. The result was chaos. The company bled money faster than it could fly passengers. By the early 2000s, Nigeria Airways was drowning in over $500 million in debt. In May 2003, after 32 years of service, the government pulled the plug. Nigeria's proud airline, once the nation's wings, was dead. Thousands lost their jobs, families were left stranded, and an entire generation grew up without a national carrier. For nearly 15 years, the dream remained buried, until a familiar promise resurfaced. Under the Buhari administration, a new vision emerged: Nigeria Air, a modern private-public partnership that would restore Nigeria's image and reclaim its place in the skies. This time, they promised, it would be different. At the helm of this resurrection stood one man, Hadi Sirika, a trained pilot, former senator, and aviation minister, confident, articulate, and passionate about flying. To many Nigerians, he seemed like the perfect man to bring back the nation's airline, and Sirika made sure everyone believed that vision. At the Farnborough Air Show in the UK, he unveiled the sleek new logo of Nigeria Air, promising transparency, efficiency, and a model free from government interference. The plan sounded perfect. The government would hold only 5% of the shares, while private investors would control the rest. A $300 million investment, 30 aircraft within 2 years, a bold, modern fleet ready to compete across Africa. But the cracks began showing almost immediately. Critics questioned why the government hired a foreign branding company to design the logo, spending a staggering $600,000 on something local agencies could have done for far less. Sirika denied the figure, but never disclosed the real cost. Then came the first blow. By September 2018, Just 2 months after the grand announcement, the project was suspended indefinitely due to lack of funds and investor confidence. And so, the dream of Nigeria Air died again. But Sirika wasn't done. Not yet. 3 years later, in 2021, he returned with renewed determination. He promised the airline would finally take off before Buhari's administration ended in May 2023. Nigerians had heard it all before, but this time, the minister spoke with absolute certainty. "We will get it flying," he declared. Before the end of this administration, inshallah, to make the dream real, the government turned to an unlikely partner, Ethiopian Airlines, Africa's largest and most successful airline, a model of stability and growth. They would own 49% of Nigeria Air, while 3 Nigerian investors would share 46%, leaving the government's symbolic 5%. But the closer the project got to its supposed launch, the stranger it became. Investors shifted, documents were revised. Even the Nigerian Sovereign Investment Authority, once listed as a stakeholder, was suddenly removed, dismissed as a clerical error. Still, Sirika pushed forward, insisting everything was under control. But behind the press conferences and photo ops, insiders whispered about missing funds, rushed contracts, and secret deals. As the Buhari government neared its final days, Sirika's desperation grew. He had promised Nigerians, and perhaps himself, that the airline would fly before May 29, 2023. The problem: there was no airline to fly. The company had no planes of its own, no staff, no valid operating certificate, nothing. But then came the idea that would change everything and exposed one of the most audacious deceptions in modern Nigerian history. Sirika reached out to Ethiopian Airlines with an unusual request: "Lend us one of your aircraft, just for a few days. Repaint it, rebrand it. Let's show the world that Nigeria Air is ready." And on May 26, 2023, that's exactly what happened. The borrowed Boeing 737-800 arrived in Abuja, shining in green and white. Cameras rolled, the media cheered, government officials clapped as Sirika smiled triumphantly for the last time as minister. What no one knew, at least not yet, was that the grand unveiling was nothing more than theatre. Because this wasn't a launch, it was a cover-up, a desperate attempt to mask failure with illusion. And it would take only a few sharp eyes, and one relentless investigative journalist, to rip the mask off completely. The applause had barely faded when the questions began. Aviation enthusiasts, journalists, and even curious Nigerians online started digging. Within hours, the internet was flooded with side-by-side images. The same Boeing 737-800, flying for Ethiopian Airlines just days before the unveiling. Its registration number, its design, even the faint outline of the old logo beneath the fresh paint. Nothing escaped the watchful eyes of the public. Nigeria Air's grand debut had been nothing more than a performance, a well-orchestrated illusion to deceive the nation into believing the airline was alive. But behind that illusion was something much darker, a trail of corruption, manipulation, and desperation that went far beyond just one borrowed plane. The man at the center of it all, Hadi Sirika, had sold the dream of a reborn national carrier. But what he delivered was a facade built on lies, loopholes, and inflated contracts. For years, he had promised transparency, boasting about a public-private partnership that would revolutionize the aviation sector. Yet, as investigations began, it became clear that those promises were hollow. To understand how deep the deceit ran, one must first understand the system he tried to bend. In aviation, launching an airline isn't as simple as painting a plane and calling it yours. It requires an Air Operator Certificate, the AOC, issued by the Nigerian Civil Aviation Authority, NCA. Obtaining one isn't easy. It takes years, involving safety audits, documentation, staff training, and inspections. No shortcuts, no politics. But Sirika didn't have years, he had days. The Buhari administration was ending in less than a week, and he needed results. He reportedly pressured the NCAA to bypass their rigorous procedures and approve the airline. Even though Nigeria Air didn't own a single registered aircraft, the NCAA refused. They insisted that any airline applying for certification must have at least 3 Nigerian registered planes. Nigeria Air had none, just one rented Ethiopian jet flying under a foreign license. So Sirika found another way, a loophole of his own making. He told the NCAA that the aircraft wouldn't operate commercially. It was only for a static display, a harmless exhibition, but that display was broadcast nationwide, with banners, speeches, and the promise of flights soon to begin. What Nigerians were witnessing wasn't a preview, it was propaganda. And then came the journalist who would blow the story open. David Hundian, a relentless investigative reporter known for taking on corruption, no matter how powerful the target. When he turned his attention to Nigeria Air, he followed a trail that most had ignored. Using flight tracking data, David confirmed the shocking truth. The plane that had been celebrated as Nigeria Air's flagship was in fact ETAPL, a Boeing 737 owned by Ethiopian Airlines. Within days of the Abuja event, the same jet quietly returned to Ethiopia, resumed regular commercial service, and continued flying under its original registration. There had been no deal, no operational structure, no certified staff, just a photo op dressed as progress. That as David published his findings, Nigerians were furious. The veil had been lifted, lawmakers demanded answers. The House of Representatives summoned aviation officials to explain how billions of naira had been spent on what was now clearly a fraud. The numbers were staggering. Over 85 billion, more than $200 million, had been poured into the Nigeria Air project. Yet, there were no aircraft, no operational headquarters, no certification, only a logo, a press conference, and a single borrowed plane. When investigators began tracing the money, what they found was a network of questionable contracts, ghost companies, and payments that led directly to Sirika's circle. Firms linked to his family and associates had received massive payouts for consultancy, branding, and airport support projects. Many of these services, as it turned out, didn't even exist. Among the revelations, one stood out: a company named Tiana Nigeria Limited, tied to one of Sirika's close associates, received a 1.3 billion contract for consultancy related to Nigeria Air. Another firm, Al Buruk Global Investment Limited, connected to Sirika's daughter and her husband, reportedly received 1.5 billion for work that was never carried out. His brother, through OS Nigeria Limited, allegedly benefited from over 3 billion across 4 aviation-related contracts, each one linked back to the same ministry. The deeper investigators dug, the clearer it became. Nigeria Air wasn't a failed project. It was a money machine disguised as national progress. As outrage grew, the airline operators of Nigeria, representing private carriers, took legal action. They accused the ministry of violating court orders and attempting to grant illegal operational licenses. The AON claimed that Nigeria Air hadn't even passed the first stage of its 5-phase certification process, contradicting Sirika's repeated claims that it was ready to fly. The ministry had lied both to the public and to the industry it was supposed to regulate. The facade crumbled completely after the new administration took office. The Economic and Financial Crimes Commission (EFCC) launched an extensive investigation. What they uncovered confirmed the suspicions many Nigerians already had. In May 2024, Hadi Sirika was arrested alongside his brother, daughter, and son. The EFCC charged them with a 5.8 billion fraud connected directly to the Nigeria Air project. They faced 10 counts, including abuse of office, diversion of public funds, and conspiracy to defraud. Prosecutors detailed how government contracts were awarded to family-owned companies, all while Sirika publicly assured Nigerians that the project was clean. Court documents painted a damning picture, one of greed wrapped in patriotism. Payments were made for aircraft procurement, simulator purchases, and fire truck maintenance at airports, all projects riddled with inflated figures or no tangible results. Sirika maintained his innocence, claiming political persecution. He argued that every decision had been approved in the national interest, but as evidence mounted, his defense began to crumble. Testimonies from officials, contractors, and civil servants all pointed in the same direction. The Nigeria Air project was a scam designed to drain public funds under the guise of national pride. Then, in August 2024, the final nail was driven into the coffin. A federal high court in Lagos declared the partnership between Nigeria and Ethiopian Airlines invalid. The court ruled that the entire deal violated multiple provisions of Nigerian law and lacked proper transparency. The so-called national carrier was officially dead before it had ever truly lived. But behind the scandal, the damage was already done. Trust was broken, billions were gone, and once again, ordinary Nigerians, the people whose hopes had been used as fuel for deceit, were left to watch another dream vanish into thin air. In the aftermath, what remained was a haunting question. How did a project born out of patriotism become a case study in corruption? The truth is, the Nigeria Air saga wasn't just about one man or one ministry. It reflected a system that rewards illusion over substance, where political legacy matters more than national progress. A culture where the need to claim success before leaving office outweighs the duty to build something real. And so, Nigeria Air, like Nigeria Airways before it became another monument to ambition destroyed by greed. Another dream that took flight, only to crash before ever leaving the ground. Today, the green and white logo sits in government archives, gathering dust. The once promised wings of Nigeria exist only in memory and in the courtroom. Files of a nation still chasing accountability. Perhaps one day, Nigeria will truly reclaim the skies. But as history has shown, until integrity replaces illusion, the only thing flying high in the nation's aviation story will be empty promises. It was a cover-up, a desperate attempt to mask failure with illusion, and it would take only a few sharp eyes and one relentless investigative journalist to rip the mask off completely.